Hi, I'm Teresa from Phoenix Gate Crafts, and today we're talking about how to process our way through a project. This is going to bring together some of the information from my past two videos on floss and fiber. It's also going to completely leave off the finishing process because that's going to be the next video. But this is how to actually deal with the project itself. And we're going to be doing this pattern, which is my pumpkin cross stitch pattern. And basically how to process through this kind of thing. Now this is a small simple pattern. We're not actually doing it either. It is part of a kit available in my Etsy shop at Halloween time. And I'm going to be showing you some different processes on this Tunisian crochet swatch. And I'm going to just show you pretty much everything that are frequently asked questions in most of the Facebook groups that I'm part of. Typically, when we start a project, we start with a pattern. Now, you are not restricted to a pattern that you purchase. You can make your own pattern. All you need is some graph paper or grid paper and a pencil so that you can erase. You can technically use pen, but who wants to not be able to erase? I made this on a website. There are several out there. We're not talking about that though, so just so you know, there's lots of options. Heck, even if you don't want to use a pattern, you can just BS your way through something that's pretty full of colors. I did this because I just paired up a couple of different colors, did one color patch, and then did the other color patch. And just made a whole bunch of, well, technically rectangles, but squares, whatever. What do you look at first for a project? Well, you need to pick your colors and you need to pick your fabric. I did do a deep dive of these in my past two videos. There's usually a list of floss, usually with DMC numbers, and it'll tell you how much to get. Now, stitches. How far a skein or hank of floss is going to go is totally going to depend on you, how you stitch, the requirements of the pattern, and what size count fabric you're using. Because a higher count means that you're going to get a lot more X's, which means that your thread, your floss, is going to go farther. This is a small pattern. It's really not big. This size on 14 count Aida only is about 2.5 to 2.5 inches big. It fits this size of a hoop when it's finished. As a result, there's not a lot of stitches. There's only 168 stitches in black, 48 stitches in green, and 458 stitches in orange. Now, understanding that there is a lot of variability depending on how efficiently you use your floss, typically the way I do it, and I am very efficient with my floss, if there are 2,000 stitches required in a color, that's my breaking point. 2,000 or below, I will stay with that one skein of floss. 2,000 or more, I will get a second skein of floss. But if you are not so efficient, and when you're a beginner, you're probably not so efficient, I'd use about 1,600 stitches as that break-even point. But as you gain more experience, you are going to have a better sense for how far you can push 8.7 meters that are in a hank of floss. So once you have your floss, you also need to figure out your fabric. Now, I went through all the math and everything in the previous video, But here's how you know how many stitches you have. Patterns are always on a grid. And this one you can easily tell where the center is. It has this nice little triangle. Sometimes it'll be a little red line. Sometimes it'll just be an extra thick line that's in a random spot. Sometimes you have to actually use math to figure it out. But knowing where the center point is helpful. But understanding the grid is also very helpful. Most grids, like, honestly, I have never seen a grid that wasn't like this. But most grids have 10 stitches sideways and up and down, so vertically and horizontally. So this is 10 stitches. Each box represents a stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 stitches. And then look, there's a 10. And then you got 10 more, and then there's a 20, 10 more, 30, 40, 50. This one is only 50 stitches wide. Also, you notice the same happens vertically. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. This one is 50 stitches vertically. 50 horizontal, 50 vertical. Basically, whatever count of fabric you are going to use. So if I were to use a 14 count of fabric, I take this 50, divide it by 14, and that is how many inches I need that will fit this grid. Now this grid has a bunch of empty space in it. This is not full coverage. All you're doing is this pumpkin. So that amount will give you a little bit of space to either side for your hoop. You also want a little bit more space than just this, because this is like 8 stitches here and 8 stitches over here. So that's not going to give a lot of spare room for finishing and the hoop. So we're going to add some. Now because this is a very small pattern, I'm probably only going to add 2 inches to each edge. So whatever number of inches this turns out to, I'm not doing the math right here. You have a calculator on your phone. You can do that. 50 divided by 14 is how many inches? Plus 2 more. That's how many inches you need going one direction. Then you need to do the same thing for the top, which, because this is the same measurement, it's going to be the same amount. So whatever total you got, that's the number of inches you need horizontally and vertically. Now, once you have your fabric, I made mine out of Tunisian crochet because this does have quite a nice little grid with some obvious holes. You need to figure out where you're going to start. There are 2 places to start your project: in the middle or in the corner. Now, the corner can be tricky on a project like this because, friendly reminder, you've got a little bit of a border around on your fabric, and then these are all empty stitches. Like if I were to truly start in the corner, I'd have nothing, 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 and then something either down here or kind of over in this area. That is a lot of stitches to count on teeny tiny little grids. Friendly reminder that one of these is like 15 stitches across. That's tiny. Sorry, I lied. Each one of these is 14 stitches across, 15 stitches down. So that's an inch. That's a lot of stitches, and they're very tiny. It's hard to see. Honestly, if you're having trouble seeing your stitches or you feel like you're having trouble counting, try getting a new prescription for your glasses. See your eye doctor. That really helped me. But regardless, that's hard on this project. Now, so I started this project up in the corner, upper left-hand corner, because there was a nice neat row of one color going straight down the top left side, and then there were a lot of convenient color blocks moving out from there. So that worked out really well. I did the top left grandfather first, then the top right grandmother, then the bottom left grandfather, than the bottom right grandmother. And it really worked out considering the pages of the pattern, because yes, some patterns are more than one page. And, just to know, if you are physically dealing with a physical pattern for something with multiple pages, you can just tape where the grid matches. There's usually a few shaded lines where they overlap. You just fold there, physically tape them together. No big deal. But for something like this, we like to start in the middle. Now, real quick, because I did talk about paper patterns, for those of you who are curious, there are a few apps that you can put on your phone or a iPad or other tablet device that you can use to keep track of digital patterns, so you don't have to print anything out. The one typically used by Apple users is Markup RXP. I use Pattern Keeper because I have an Android. Maybe in a future video I'll go through one of those, but not right now. We have enough to get through. But regardless of whether you prefer digital patterns or physical paper patterns, I'm going to show you on the physical pattern because that makes it easier for these purposes here. The other method of starting is from the center, and that's where this come in, because remember, it's a grid. You start up here, you start over here, and you follow it down, and you will find the exact point where all of them converge. And you've got a stitch there, there, surrounding this central point. Sometimes the central point is in the middle of a stitch. That's not what's happening here. It doesn't matter either way. You can identify it, and that's a good starting point. The benefit to starting in the center versus starting in a corner is that you will always be centered on your piece, because if you find the center on your piece, you will have an even border pretty much all the way around. Unless you screwed up on your measurements. That happens. How do we find the center of the piece of fabric? It is really easy. First, we thread our needle. Now, I didn't really go into this in the last video, but it's basically, you saw how that's kind of split. Like that. It doesn't always like to go through evenly. Now, first of all, this is the ancient way to do it. I was taught this by my mom, who was taught by her mom. Get the tip very wet. Yes, you need spit for this. Spit has enzymes that are basically like a little glue. Then you flatten it with your fingers. And this is why I was having problems. You might not be able to see it, but there's a little bit that's going out. That's just like a little extra on that tip. That interferes. So what we do is we snip that off. And by the way, these snips work for floss or yarn. Now we've got that pinned flat. And what we do is we keep it pinched so you can barely see that it's there. Put our eye flat on top so that the opening is on top of our little thing. And we push through. It will scrape up any spare hairs and make it so you can floss your needle. You do not need a needle threader. I do this. Yes, this is a huge example. I do this on 26 and 28 size needles. Absolutely tiny needles like this, because it just works. Now, if you have difficulty seeing this, which is legit, there are different kinds of needle threaders. Now, there is a type that has a usually red or blue kind of body with little wires sticking out. I do not have any of those. They are shit. I don't like them. They always break. That wire that you're supposed to stick into the eye of your needle, that little hole, that if something isn't cooperating, and thread doesn't always cooperate, it will pull out because there's nothing actually securing that little wire into the little hand grippy thing. That's why I like the metal ones. These are light, thin metal. They do bend easily, but these work very easily in pretty much any situation. So what you do, you pick the side. There's a little hook and there's a big hook. I'm going to use the big one, but you use the little one for little needles. And you just stick it in. And then you take the end of your floss, hook it in, and pull it through. This, because of how it's wider in the hook going sideways, it's not going to break very easily. It might bend, but you can always just bend it back, and it's not that big of a deal. And while I'm talking about tools, I am going to tell you about one other little device, which is a needle minder. Now, I don't like having these on my project, but that's what you're supposed to do. It is a little picture. Yes, I made this with a Shrinky Dink. And by the way, I often give these out with orders of thread hoppers, which I'm not going to go into in this video. Well, I might. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. But it's got a little magnet on the back, and it's got another little magnet that goes with it. And then you put it in the corner of your piece, and the magnet on the other side holds it together. I don't use it that way. I have a little thing. I often just keep these in my little bin with my floss. But there. And by the way, you ever see a thing that's like metal and it goes whoop, 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 whoop? They're just moving a magnet like I was just now. So, if you were a little kid like I was when I first learned how to embroider, your mom may have taken this and done a little knot at the ends. That is for little children. That is not how we adults are supposed to do this. Now, friendly reminder, this floss is only supposed to go from the tip of your fingers to your nose in length. And we control the length that we're using by having it bend. There's going to be one short end, that's your tail, and there's going to be a long end, that is your working floss. And it goes through the eye, and it just bends. That is how we do. Now, this is not how we have to start, because we need oftentimes 2 threads for our projects. So you can have 2 different strands that you hold together and thread up. There's also something called a loop start, and I'm just going to tell you about this now. Basically, what you do is you fold your thread, your floss, in half. I keep wanting to call this yarn because I'm working with yarn. Anyway, but when you fold it in half, you have a nice little loop here. Then what you do is you take the 2 tails and you thread them up. This turns one strand into 2 strands. And there you go. This is going to be your tail, your loose tail, and this is going to be your loop start. Now I'm going to show you the loop start once we find the center, because for this project, we are working from the center. So finding the center is very easy. You fold it back in half, and then you fold it in half again. Now this corner where everything is folded twice, that's your center. Find the hole that is there or closest, and you are good. Now, I want to tell you about gridding real quick. So basically, when you make a grid on your fabric, you are making a grid that matches the grid on here. I'm not going to do it, but basically you draw in the lines. So you find your center and you draw the center line, and then you draw the next lines over, and then the next lines over. You could also just draw a grid and then find your center based on the grid and where it is equivalent to your pattern. But there are a couple different tools you can use. One tool is devil's pubes, basically some metallic floss of some kind. You could use regular floss in a contrasting color. You could use actual thread for sewing. You can draw it on using water-soluble ink, or my personal favorite is water-soluble pencil that you get from the sewing department at your local big box craft store. They look like this. This is Singer brand. Typically you get 2 of them for like $3 or so. They're really cheap, and you can wash them right off your fabric at the end, which we'll be talking about in the next video. You can also use this, even if you're not gridding. It's not going to work because this is acrylic yarn, but you just make a little mark, open it up, and make another little mark coming out this way. And it'll make a little plus sign or a little T. And that will help you find your center again. Now, the way you process through a pattern. I think the easier way to do this is to actually show you the different stitches, because each pattern is going to be a little different. Now, what I like to do is I like to do bigger blocks of color first whenever possible. Now, I typically do whatever's closest to the center first, kind of no matter what, because that gets me on track for the whole rest of the project. But here, you see here, this is the center. Now, something that might be easier in this circumstance than starting smack in the middle, because you see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stitches of orange. Well, minus 1. We have to come down 9 stitches to be able to stitch going up. Or 8 stitches starting from up here and going down. Or 7 if we started from here. That's an awful lot of stitches away from center. I might start with the black and start like right here or right here, because that coming from the center dot is diagonal 1 and over 1, or over 2 and up 1. And then I can start in this stitch right here, and I can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then do this, take off, then do this one, and then because I've got these 2 in correct alignment, I can do this one. Then because I have the smile, I can start somewhere else. So say on this row, and I can come up here and go down, and it's a lot less counting that you have to do because everything's in relationship to everything else. And then once I get the orange kind of filled in, then I can go around with the black. And then I can just fill in this section right here with the green, and then the project will be done. So typically what I do is I try to do big blocks of color first, whatever makes sense for the pattern. And then I'll do any confetti and then I'll do any texture stitches. And the last thing I typically do is back stitching. Now, what are all these terms? Let's go through some of the basic stitches so you can use them as you need. There are two main styles of cross stitching, and they are English and Dutch. English is where having the loop start comes in really handy, because in English style, you are stitching one stitch at a time. So, find your starting point. I like to go top left to bottom right. Now, I did not pull all the way through because I want that loop to still be there in the back, and I want to keep it in the back. There is a way to do this from the front. I just don't operate that way. I'm very good at things shifting around, but you put your needle through that loop and you pull it tight. Not super tight, just a little tight. And then you can go and do the other half of your stitch. Now this is a full stitch. A full X is a full stitch. And now I'm going to do that again in the next stitch. Top left to bottom right. And let's do this a little differently. Let's do bottom left to top right. And you're just going in the holes. This is why you want a blunt tip needle if possible. Yes, this is also a bent tip tapestry needle. But because you're just pushing through a hole, the blunt tip isn't going to pierce in the middle, splitting your threads. And then I can do it down here, bottom corner, top, it really doesn't matter which way you do it, as long as the top half of the stitch goes the same way. So you notice that my second half of the stitch is always on the going up to the right diagonal, the positive slope if you're into math. Now, you could do this one first and all your top stitches go the other way. Does not matter. But you're going to get a lot more uniform look if the stitch on top always goes the same direction. All that way or all that way. Now, what do you do when you finish? I've got like 3 stitches. All we do to finish, well, you can do knots. I'm going to say this here, you can do knots. It's not that big of a deal. The reason most people don't do knots is because these pictures are decorative. And we don't want funky textures affecting the finish. But I'll be honest, little knots, unless all of your tension is very funky, doesn't matter. So for a knot, all you do is you go under to create a loop, and then you pull tight. And you do this twice. Some schools of thought, I am having technical issues. Some schools of thought, you go under a little piece of the fabric. That's not what I was taught. And you want to push it down and pull it tight. And then you can simply snip. Now, some people will tell you, do not ever knot, never knot, no knots. If you are working on fabric that is going to be something washed, so a handkerchief or a garment of clothing, like some people do pants pockets or the backs of sweaters and stuff like that, you need to knot because that will secure your piece. There is no getting this out. That this is not coming undone. This can be washed and roughened and those stitches are not going to come out. That is what you want. And by the way, if you do English style, you do not have to loop start. That's just how I did it this time. Dutch style is a lot easier for the tuck method though, so I'm going to show you those two together. Just remember, take what you want. There is no technically correct way to do this. I mean, there might be technically correct, but whatever you do, as long as it looks good, works. Now the Dutch style, instead of doing one stitch at a time, we actually do a row of stitches. We do half the stitches going one way, then we do the other half of all the stitches going the other way. And I will show you the tuck method. So you can start left and go right. You can start on the right and go left. You can start at the top and go down. You can start at the bottom and go up. This one really works if you've got a few stitches going around in different places, like they're not right next to each other. You know, going back to our pattern, we've got these black stitches right here, down here, up here, down here, up here, down here, up here, down here. You're not always starting and doing perfectly smooth rows. So English style is really good for something like this, whereas all these long lines of orange, Dutch style might be a little bit easier. I like to start on this side, and you'll see why in a moment. So we go up, but don't pull all the way through, and then we go down. And then on the back, what we do is we hold down this end. You want it long enough to go under about 3 or 4 or 5, somewhere around there, stitches. Then what we do is we're going to come up here, but we're going to make sure that that tail is between where we came out and where we're going in. Because when we pull, that's going to tack down that tail. And just make sure that that's there. And when we go down, we want to make sure it's below the tail. And when we come back up, we want it to be over. Now, if you have 2 tacking it down, that is perfectly fine. But if you can have more, that's better and more secure. And because of this method where we tack things down, this is why we typically hand wash our finished projects. Not because Aida isn't machine washable or cotton floss isn't machine washable. It's simply because, whoops, this can come out. See, easily. So having it tucked under more means that you're less likely to have it come out. Now, there is a sewing method. You'll notice that I'm just stitching in hand right now. I don't have a hoop or anything to stabilize this. So there is a sewing method you can use, which is nice and easy, where you go basically down where you're going to go down and come up where you're going to come up. And then you pull through and you're working from the front. A lot of people really like this. You have to be careful though. You can pull it too tight. And that's going to bunch up your fabric and your stitches are going to be too small. You typically want to go until it just kind of stops. You go until it stops. And now you see I have this nice line of half stitches. So when you have just one diagonal, that's a half stitch. You might have half stitches in your pattern. My pattern has nothing but full stitches, but if it has half stitches, come to the back, you're done. We'll talk about half stitches in a minute. But since we're doing full stitches, we want to do the other half of the stitches. So then we just go back, whoops, the other way. Now, to prevent that from happening, let me get this back on my needle. There is a way to hold your needle. These 2 fingers hold your tail down. This one touches the eye, and only these 2 touch your needle. And this delicate hold is all you need. If you really are struggling to get your needle through, if you have to push, you are not using the right needle. You need to go down a size. So bigger number, but a smaller needle, because this should not be hard. There are a thimble. You know the thimble from the Monopoly game? That is a tiny version of a real thimble. And you put that on your finger so that when you push your needle through the fabric, you don't hurt the tip of your finger. Because anything you do on here is fine once. You do it over and over and over again, you're probably going to get an injury. That's why a lot of people use thimbles. However, if you are grabbing here and then grabbing here, and you're grabbing more to the back, you can control your tail and it won't slip through. See, I let go. I pull it halfway through, let go, pull it through, and then grab the tail. And then here I finish. And now I have a lovely, neat line of stitching. And you only pull until it stops. You don't pull it tight. And then you can just tuck under a bunch of stitches. You're done, and I like to leave a touch. But now we're finished. We have a row of stitching. And that's how and that's also how you handle your needle. You shouldn't ever have to force anything. Unless you're doing fractional stitches. Let me get a little bit more. Let me get a little bit more yarn so we can go through a few different stitches. So something you might have to do is a fractional stitch, and these are just like what they sound like. If two lines make one X and one X is a full stitch, fractional stitches are parts of this. So a half stitch is just like regular, but you know how I like to start at the top left and go to the bottom right? That's my bottom stitch, my bottom half. You want your half stitches to match the top half. So because my top half is bottom left to top right, remember yours could be different, that's what I'm doing for my half stitch. Half is not the only fraction we can do. There are 4 legs. 1, 2, 3, 4 to each stitch. So a half stitch is just one full leg. A quarter stitch, which can be in any corner, is going to be literally just half of that. So instead of going to this hole, I am going to go into the middle. Like that. That tiny bit. So typically you'll have a fractional stitch like here, and then you'll have it fraction right there like that. And then when you come and do the outlining, you're going to have an outline that outlines. See, and it makes this nice little neat corner that still feels filled in. The last fractional stitch is 3/4 of a stitch. So 3/4 is a half plus a quarter. And you'll be told exactly which one in your pattern to go to. I'm going to do this one. So you do a half stitch first. Oops. And then you do a quarter stitch. Go under your half stitch into the middle. And there you go. Fractional stitches. You might have half stitches, but you also might have a thing called a tent stitch. And the only difference between a half stitch and a tent stitch is the fact that you're kind of going the opposite way. So if you're doing half stitches, you'd go up and then just like I did back over here, you'd go up and then you come down and go up and then you come down and go up and then you come down and go up and you just do that. The back would have these neat little lines. Tent stitches are the opposite. You kind of work backwards. So going the same way, you'd start on the bottom left and go right. This part is normal. But then you'd go to the next stitch over. And then do your next fraction. And then you come back up and then you go to the next bottom over. And this looks basically the same on the front, but on the back you have more texture. So this is better for hiding your tail under. The pattern will tell you. There is another kind of start that you can do. And this is really handy if you have a single strand of floss. Let's do it over here. So you see how over here, we're going to ignore that. I'm going to talk about jumping in a minute. But I don't know what this method is called. It's something I kind of just do. So you pull through and then you pull through again. And as best you can, kind of trap that little tail into your loop. You can pull that real tight. It's not a knot, but it's a great way of being able to start a single thread for what we're going to do next. So the most hated stitch, there's two of them, are French knots and back stitching. Now a French knot, I have a whole other video on this. You pull it through and you hold it out from where it's coming out of the thing. You bring it down and it'll tell you if you need 1, 2, or 3 loops. And then you do just slightly above your hole, like 1 thread in between where you come out and where you're going in. And then you pull it down. Do not pull it tight, just pull it taut. And there you have a little texture item. If you wanted, could you use a bead there instead? Totally. Sometimes beads are more appropriate. Sometimes patterns will tell you to put beads, in which case you're going to do something like this, or it will go on the top half of your X. And you do those, basically they're usually in a corner. You do those wherever they are required in your pattern. They're usually a little dot in a color. And then let's do backstitch. Now because this is 2 plies, it's going to be thicker than what I'm going to do here. But technically for proper backstitch, you do it on every stitch. And you go out and then you come back to meet it. That's why it's called backstitch. And then you go out to where you want it to start and then you come back to meet your line. Now I don't like this because it takes a lot more yarn, because on the back you're also creating a line. See how this line goes double? Each one of these is the width of 2 stitches. And then you go further out. Whoops, not there. To the next one. And then you come back. I don't like doing that. I like doing half back stitch, where you go forward for one. So I'm going to do this on the other side. Yes, you would normally go up. Here, I'll do one last back stitch. because you would do that. Oops, be careful of loops. So you go forward. That's a forward stitch. And then I go forward and do a back stitch. It uses about 1/3 less thread to do this, and I don't see a difference on top. And since you can't see my back, you can do this entirely from the front. And we'll end there. And it creates this nice, neat outline except for where I screwed up. A lot of people don't like French knots because I don't think they were taught to do it correctly. A lot of people don't like back stitching, I think, because it's this one last step you have to do before you finish. And you'll notice my pattern, no back stitching. 100% full stitches, it's fine. But a lot of times back stitching creates detail work. Like here's a picture of a project I made for my mom of a bicycle. This is the completed project with all the back stitching, and it looks like a bike. It also has French knots and everything. This is a picture of it half done. You don't see the bike details nearly as well. Backstitching and outlining also allows colors to pop. They also create texture because a good chunk of cross stitching isn't just color, it's also texture. And that's important to remember. We also have a thing called confetti stitch. And confetti is where you have one stitch in the middle of nowhere. You can start this with a pin stitch, a loop start, or you could even tuck, do that 2-line tuck. Friendly reminder, this isn't a tutorial, this is just for you to know that it exists. Now, you can have a front start. I'm going to do a confetti stitch. Because a confetti is one stitch in one color all by its lonesome, it can be surrounded by other colors, but it's going to be the only one in its own color. So I'm going to start this with a front start stitch, and I'm going to end with a pin stitch. So with a front start, you start with a knot. But don't worry. You push it down in the middle of a stitch, kind of farther off to the side of where you're going to start. I'm going to start it here. And you pull it. Don't pull too tight. And then I just start my stitch like normal. And I do my stitch. Now on the back, I make sure to pin that down. Just like I did before, to make sure it goes underneath those. And then I finish my stitch. And now I'm going to do the pin stitch. So what you do is you go up between the two holes. And you come down in the middle. Then you go to the bottom. And you go up between the two bottom holes. And you come down in the middle. Now some people feel that this is sturdy enough. I don't. I like to go underneath both existing stitches as one more tuck just for a little bit of security. Then to end the pin stitch, you cut your floss, and to finish off the front start, you pull up on your knot and cut right under your knot. You can pull this to the back, and now nothing is seen from the front. You're like, oh no, but I can see that little pin stitch underneath. I know you can. That's because I'm not getting good coverage here. You notice how when I had 2 strands of floss, you can't see as much white underneath. You still can, but you can't see as much. But you see a ton of white where I have a single strand. If I wanted proper coverage, I probably should have done 3 strands. But it's important now that you can see this. When you've got this full of texture, if you're doing full coverage, or even if you're not doing full coverage, but you've got these teeny tiny little things, like if I did a pin stitch with this, has pretty proper coverage. Right here has really good coverage. You would not be able to see that. That teeny tiny bit. Did I use it here? No, but had I could have. Yeah, I did the tuck method. Nice thing about the tuck method is the back, I feel, looks pretty neat. Now, different people are going to tell you different things. Some people really pride themselves on the fact that their backs are as neat as their fronts. Clearly, I do not care about this. Now, jumps. If you are jumping, like I jump from here to here and then back, proper technique is that you don't do a jump forward and then jump back over more than 2 stitches. If you're going to just jump in one, like if I was working on this section and then I needed to jump over here and work on this section and I didn't want to cut my floss, I could just jump over there if it's no more than 4 stitches away. However, when I did my Bailey dog, this one, this is 100% confetti. Look at this beginning part. You cannot see a dog in this. It took until this project was over 50% complete because it was nothing but confetti, this kind of stitch. And after like 2.5 seconds of pin stitching to start and end, loop stitching to start and pin stitching to end, I was just like, you know what? I don't give a rat's ass. I'm jumping. And so I got to this point where I was just jumping all the way around. The back looks like nothing but grass. You know what? Now that it's finished, can you tell? Can you tell in its frame that the back is a hot mess? No, you cannot. Because as long as you are finishing your piece, the back doesn't matter. The only time the back matters is if it's affecting the texture on the front. So either your knots are pulling your stitches too tight, or you've got a really big like clump of knot on the back. That's the only time it matters. And I could get away with this because I was using a hoop. Now I'm going to talk about hoops in a minute, but I want to talk about knots real quick and how to prevent knots, because this is kind of affected by how you process your project. The way you get a knot is when your thread super twists. So I'm going to go ahead and super twist up my yarn. This happens with yarn too, by the way. Most knots with anything is when that happens. And then what happens is you go to make your stitch. And let's see if this will happen here. And things get a little crazy and twisted. It's not happening. And your loop basically goes around your other loop. And it'll pull it tight. Now they don't all look like this. This is really easy to pull. But there's a way to prevent this. Now, there's the after the fact method, where basically you pull and you have your finger inside the loop. I like to also do it where my finger is holding where the thread is going in and I am pulling from. And that prevents. You also can just dangle and allow your floss to untwist. And that is going to really help see how that has a nice clean loop? No knot is going to happen there. Prevention is more important than actually fixing it, though I will link a video on how to fix knots. But anyway, that's how you prevent knots. Now, how do you hold your work? Now, I've been stitching in hand with this, but there are some tools so that you don't have to do this. If you're going to be doing a lot of jumping, you really need a hoop or a Q-snap or a frame or something to prevent. Let's do a jump real quick. I'm going to have this stitch here, and then I'm going to do a real quick stitch over here, and oh my gosh, I'm pulling it so tight. And I'm going to do this stitch over here. I'm going to pull real tight. Tension is key in here and everything else. And see how that just bunched up right there. That's a funky texture between there and there. It's got a little bit of a pooch. It's not perfectly flat. This is pulling, because I've got it too tight, this is pulling this stitch closer to this stitch, and it's creating a texture in the fabric. You could go for that, but that's not what was intended here. And this stitch looks like a 3/4 stitch, because that's really pulling that hole big. To prevent this, you can use a hoop. Now, I'm a hoop girl. I like me a hoop. And there are a lot of different kinds of hoops. There are wooden or bamboo hoops of various sizes. I've got a giant one that's absolutely huge. Now, this hoop has a little screw. You unscrew with this little washer here. You unscrew it, and this outer loop becomes loose. And you can pull it off. The looser it gets, the bigger it is. Then you put your fabric on it. You put it so you put your fabric on top of the bottom. You put the top one around the outside. You might need to open it a little bit more. You scooch it on so everything's even, and then you tighten it up. Until you can't get it to go anymore. I'm just doing this quick. And you can push up, and if this side was secure over here, you wouldn't have any give in the middle. You do this in a variety of sizes. Now, I don't like the wooden ones. When you want to move it, you just loosen it, pop it out, move it, and put it somewhere else and stitch inside. I don't like the wooden ones. They're slippery. They're cheap shit, honestly. They're just the cheapest. These look very pretty when you want to frame them, but I don't recommend them for stitching just because things tend to slip a lot easier. And by the way, you can move your hoop or anything as much as you want. If you're using cotton, there's no damage. Look at that, no damage. Now, you will get bends. Like there's a little bend here now that wasn't there. When you wash and iron your project at the end, that will get fixed. We're talking about that in the next video. Now, but if you don't like how slippery that hoop was, there's also what's called a Nerge hoop. And it's basically the same kind of hoop. But you see that there is a little lip around this edge right here. So your fabric will still go over it like before. You have to really open up the top of the hoop for this. And you have to get it over not only your fabric, but also that little lip. Because that lip lines up where it's just slightly over the edge of the bottom hoop. And that, because the fabric is going over, under, and then down, is going to hold it a lot more securely. Again, these are cheap shit hoops though. They don't actually make the hoops that I really like, which are the metal ones. Now this is an old school metal one, and it doesn't have a little twisty thing. It has a spring. And the reason these work so well is because it's got a little bit of cork on the inside. And then, just like before, you lay your fabric over it. Not that one. This is really not the right fabric for that. And then you put your hoop on. And that shit is secure. There's also a thing called a Q-snap. And you can make your own with PVC pipe. And basically, it's these little doohickeys. You lay your fabric over, and then you pin it down with these, and then you pull it this way to pull it taut. And then you do the same thing with the other side, top and bottom, and you pull it out. From there to there until the fabric is taut. If these are a little loose on your fabric, you can put a second layer of like some inseaming or something underneath to kind of hold it a little tighter. And now if you don't like holding these, because you have to hold it either kind of like this or like this while you're stitching. And yes, you would have to go up and then down and then up and then down and going around it. There are stands. Some are floor stands. Some are the kind that you sit on, that you can attach. They can be designed for Q-snaps. They can be designed for use with hoops. There's also a thing called frames. There are scroll frames, and then there are non-scrolling frames. They can be standing. I have a standing frame. Here is a picture of mine with a project on it. They are also some that you just can put over like a table that has no top, and then you can stitch there. Whatever is most comfortable for you. I have a video where I talk about how to hold excess fabric, but I'm going to let you know there are always options. Welcome to my headless grandfather. I'm working on it. And you see that this project has a lot of excess fabric. And the way to hold it, is I fold it forward. And then I kind of curl it, and I'm right-handed. Now remember, you don't have to work on a project straight up. You can work it sideways, upside down, whatever's most comfortable, as long as you're not getting confused on your pattern. I also like to fold this up and kind of tuck it, and then hold this against my body. And then I am able to sew very easily top to bottom. And this, you'll see here, these are confetti, and it's going to fill in for a more realistic look. Also notice that this is an urge hoop. The fabric is coming over the lip and then under. The reason I like to hold this forward is because now my fingerprints are only going to be on the back. And you can say, I only stitch when I've washed my hands. Your fingers produce oils. Those oils can tarnish your needle. Those oils will leave fingerprints on your fabric, which will collect dust as it sits and create dirty patches. You're kind of doomed unless you're constantly wearing gloves while you work, which kind of separates you from your project, makes it a little harder to do and grip. So just accept you're going to probably have to wash a dirty thing at the end. And it's okay. Now, there are clips you can get that'll hold the excess fabric wherever you want to hold it. I don't have any, but they basically look like grocery clips. Or, so I know some people use these kinds of butterfly clips. Kind of like that. but not this size, like the bigger ones. There are a few questions. First, can I move my hoop? Yes. This is not where this hoop started. And as you can see, there is a bit down here at the bottom that I have completed. You do have to move your hoop, kind of no matter what. Is dog hair a problem? No. Just accept it. She sheds. It's summer. But you're not going to do any damage to your floss by moving your hoop, especially not if you're using cotton. Some of the more delicate fabrics might have an issue, but if you are loosening and then tightening and then loosening. Do I have to remove my hoop every night? Well, you're supposed to, but I don't, because I wash and iron my fabric at the end. It all turns out fine in the end. It's kind of like in knitting or crochet, that shit will block out. Washing and ironing is basically the blocking step of this, and it turns it out nicely. You notice that I've got some color sections filled in, and then I've got a bunch of confetti. So I kind of work in blocks of picking the largest concentration of stitches in an area, finishing that, then moving on to another concentration in a different color. Some people seem to kind of have one where they're like going like a typewriter, where they looks like they're going across and across and across and across and across. And they'll have a ton of different colors of floss attached to something like a needle minder, like down here or something, or they'll have a bunch of them in a project that has a lot of colors like this. What is that? That is called parking. I don't particularly like it. I'm not that kind of organized. But basically what happens is you stitch in one color across a line. So like across here. And then when you need to switch to another color, you basically pull your thread up in the next spot it needs to go into. And then let it dangle. And then you switch to the next color. And you really are layering it on the same way a printer does. You do one color, then the next color, then the next color. Because friendly reminder, this is basically a paint by numbers pixel art. So it can very well operate the way a printer does, where it drops dots of color. I don't like that. It's too disorganized and too messy. There is a method to the madness. There's also something called Royal Rose, where basically you do each block of a pattern, either one block or two blocks together. And there's a method for where you're going to leave your next stitch when you've completed all the stitches in a section. I'm going to link a video or two about parking method and Royal Rose, but I don't use those. But a lot of people really enjoy doing that because they really like seeing something, a picture emerge out of what was once just dots. Now, do I need a grid? No. I already talked about this a little bit, but you can draw on little grid lines onto your fabric. There is also fabric you can get that already has grid lines, like colored on, that wash off. It does make counting easier because, for example, knowing that there are 10 stitches in a grid, and I know that there's 2 here, that means 10 minus 2, there are 8 stitches over here. Same goes here. I have 4 stitches here, that means I need 6 stitches of orange. It makes the counting easier, and for people who really have trouble seeing the holes in their fabric, this might be helpful. Now, what are thread hoppers? Now, I'm bringing this up because I sell them. But I want you to know that you can totally make these yourself. But, you are welcome to purchase some from me. I'll provide a link in the description. But thread hoppers basically are 2 needles with something decorative in the middle. And yeah, I don't sell these for very expensive. You're mostly paying for my time of putting these together when you purchase them from me. But the way these work really helps in situations like this pattern. Now let's pretend I just finished this stitch right here. And I have another stitch in the same color that I need to do that is 5 stitches over and 3 stitches down. So what I do is I figure out where I'm going to start counting from, and I stick the first needle in there. Then I can count over. Now I know this is tough because this is tiny. This is 16 count fabric. But 5 over, 3 down. So I'm going to go 5 over. 1, 2, 3. I need a blank. And sometimes you have to start over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you use the second needle to mark it. Then you grab up the first one. And I need to go 3 down. 1, 2, 3. And then I can mark it. And now I know where, because it's based off of this needle, I can move this out of the way. Now I know where I need to start my next stitch. And then when I'm ready to go, I have my needle. I'll use this one as an example. And I can find that, stick my needle I'm using up, pull this out, don't drop my other needle, and then I can just stitch. So yes, I sell these, link in the description. The last question. What is thread chicken and what is frogging? Thread chicken is just like yarn chicken. You're going to try and finish a section. So let's say this right here is the last stitch of a section. And I'm coming to it and I'm not sure if I'm going to have enough thread. If I win thread chicken, I will have just enough. Sometimes you'll have that much. Sometimes you'll have that much. I've played a little bit of yarn chicken today. Sometimes you'll have that much. And you'll be able to do it. Now, true thread chicken is not only finishing the thread that's on your needle, it's also finishing the thread that was in the skein. That's true winning of thread chicken. If you lose, you're probably going to need just 1 or 2 more stitches to finish, and you have to open up a new bobbin or a new skein, and you're going to have to thread up for just a few stitches. And it is friggin' annoying. So the last thing is frogging. What is frogging? Well, I'm going to ask you a different question. What sounds do frogs make? They go ribbit, rip it out. And that's all it is ripping it out. So you can unpick the stitches that you made a mistake on. You can, you might wind up frogging a whole section if you got a big bunch wrong. You could just wind up picking out a few stitches. You could also use a seam ripper. I don't have one handy. Or you could use little snips to cut and then pull out your thread. Basically, it's whenever you need to undo a stitch or two. And I want to make one thing perfectly clear. Because there isn't really a wrong way to do this, just realizing mistakes are part of the process. You don't need a neat back. You don't need perfection. And as you can see, I'm not a perfect stitcher. There are mistakes. They're part of any art form. And you know what? It is okay. It will be fine in the end. You can be neurotic about it. You can hate the fact that you're going to have to undo stitching. Like, for example, I spent 2 hours just working on this shoulder here. This shoulder over here to this shoulder. It took me 2 hours. This is the slowest motherfucking art form out of all of the art forms that I do. You see sometimes very little appreciable difference from when you start to when you end on any given session. So you could wind up having to completely undo a section because it turns out it's all wrong. You used the wrong color or something. And it's okay. It won't kill you. If you enjoy the process, undoing and redoing is just part of the process. If you enjoy the process, backstitching is just part of the process. There's nothing here that is really worthy of hate or anxiety, because ultimately, when you show this to somebody, they're probably not going to be able to tell that, oh, I put a stitch here incorrectly. I can tell you for certain I have made 3 mistakes on here, not to mention a bunch of dog hair got on it. Can you tell where they are? No, I kind of forgot where they are. But you know what? I worked around it. I bullshitted my way through. And you know what? It's fine. It's fine. So I hope you found this helpful. I hope this brings you some peace that whatever you're doing is correct. Because as long as you wind up with the picture you like, it's fine. It is the right way to do it. So happy crafting. Bye.